A fist slammed into a kitchen table hard enough to crack the wood. A phone lay on its side. Speaker on. A voice still talking. Low. Calm. The kind of calm that tells you this person has done this before. We have your son. You speak, he dies. The father stood there, chest heaving, jaw locked. He didn't answer. He didn't beg. He grabbed a pen and wrote down every word the voice said. Every detail. Every pause. Then the line went dead. The men on that call had no idea who they were dealing with. The man standing in that kitchen was Sylvester Stallone. Not the movie version. The real one. And he wasn't about to negotiate. He wasn't about to call the police. What he did over the next 72 hours tore apart one of the most dangerous criminal networks in the country. Stay with me on this. Now let me take you back 48 hours before that phone call. Because what happened in that kitchen didn't come out of nowhere. There was a fuse, and it had been lit days earlier. Stallone's son, Sage, was 22 years old. Smart kid. Wanted to make it in film on his own terms, not riding his father's name. He'd taken a small role in a low-budget independent movie shooting outside Los Angeles. The pay was nothing. The script was average. But the kid wanted the experience. Stallone respected that. He didn't interfere. The production company behind the film was called Pinnacle Ridge Media. On the surface, it looked like a dozen other small outfits trying to break into the industry. Rented office. A few mid-level producers. Nothing that would raise a flag. But here's the thing. Sage noticed something. He was on set one afternoon, waiting between takes, and one of the producers left his laptop open on a folding table. Sage wasn't snooping. He was looking for the revised schedule. What he saw instead was a spreadsheet, and the numbers on it didn't match anything a company this size should be touching. We're talking tens of millions flowing in and out through a series of shell companies. Names Sage didn't recognize. Account numbers. Transfer dates. He didn't take a photo. He didn't copy anything. But he remembered enough. And when he got home that night, he told his father. That was his mistake. Not because telling Stallone was wrong, but because Stallone did what Stallone does. He acted. He made a few calls. Quiet ones. A friend in finance confirmed what the numbers suggested. Pinnacle Ridge Media wasn't making movies. It was washing money. Dirty money. Drug money. Weapons money. The films were the front. The production budgets were the pipeline. Stallone didn't go to the police. Not yet. He went directly to the lead producer, a man named Martin Greer. Mid-50s. Slick. The kind of guy who shakes your hand a little too long and smiles while he does it. Stallone met him at a restaurant in West Hollywood and laid it out flat. He told Greer he knew about the money. He told him Sage was out of the production. And he told him that if anyone came near his family, he would make it public. Now, you might think a movie star walking into a restaurant and making threats would rattle a guy like Greer. Didn't. Greer barely blinked. He said, "Sly, I think there's been a misunderstanding." He said, "Let's not do anything hasty." He picked up the check, shook Stallone's hand, and walked out. 2 days later, Sage was gone. Here's what you need to understand about Stallone before we go any further. People look at him and they see Rocky. They see Rambo. They see an actor. But the man behind those characters didn't come from a soundstage. He came from Hell's Kitchen, New York, one of the roughest neighborhoods in the country at the time. His father was violent. His childhood was hard. Before he ever stepped in front of a camera, he'd been in more real fights than most people could count. And when fame came, he didn't stop training. He trained harder. Every single day. Weights, boxing, combat drills. Not for roles. For himself. At 60 years old, the man could still move like someone half his age. His hands were fast. His body was thick with muscle that wasn't for show. Believe me, this matters later. So when that phone call came and the voice said, "We have your son," the people on the other end of that line were operating on a very dangerous assumption. They assumed Stallone was a celebrity, a brand, a man who would panic, pay, and stay quiet. They assumed his world was red carpets and press junkets. They were wrong. The first thing Stallone did after hanging up was call one man. Dominic Vero, former Special Forces. now running a small private security firm that handled high-risk contracts overseas. The two had been close for over 20 years. Dominic didn't ask questions. Stallone said, "They took Sage." Dominic said, "I'm on my way." By midnight, both men were sitting at Stallone's kitchen table. The cracked one. The phone, the pen, the notepad with every detail from the call laid out between them. No police. The caller had made that clear. He said they had a man inside the LAPD. Whether that was true or a bluff, Stallone wasn't willing to test it. Not with his son's life. Dominic pulled up a map on his laptop. They had one lead. The burner phone that made the call had bounced off a cell tower near an industrial corridor on the eastern edge of the city. It wasn't much, but it was a direction, and that was enough. They moved before sunrise. Dominic drove. Stallone sat in the passenger seat with a printed satellite image of the industrial corridor spread across his knees. The area was a stretch of old warehouses and distribution centers, most of them half abandoned. The kind of place where trucks come and go and nobody asks what's inside them. Dominic had narrowed the cell tower ping to a quarter-mile radius. Within that radius, there were 11 buildings. Most were dark, but 2 had vehicles parked outside at 4 in the morning. And only one of those had a security camera mounted above the door. That was the one. They parked 3 blocks away. Dominic opened the trunk and handed Stallone a vest. Lightweight, Kevlar. Stallone put it on without a word. Dominic checked his sidearm and holstered it. Then he pulled out a second piece and held it out. Stallone looked at it. He shook his head. "I don't need that," he said. Dominic didn't argue. They approached on foot. No lights. The building was a single-story concrete structure with a roll-up loading dock on one side and a steel door on the other. The camera above the door was old. Fixed angle. Dominic reached up, grabbed it, and twisted it toward the wall. Took him about 3 seconds. Stallone tried the door. Locked. Dominic pulled a breaching tool from his pack and popped it open in one motion. The sound was loud. A metallic crack that echoed down the empty corridor inside. They didn't wait to see if anyone heard it. They went in. The hallway led to a wide-open floor. Pallets stacked along the walls. Forklifts sitting idle. At the far end, a light was on behind a frosted glass partition. 2 men sat inside. One was on his phone. The other was eating from a takeout container. Stallone didn't slow down. He pushed through the partition door and hit the first man before the guy could stand. One punch. Open palm to the jaw. The man's head snapped sideways and he dropped off the chair. The second man scrambled for something under the table. Dominic was already there. He pinned the man's arm, twisted it behind his back, and put him face first on the floor. Now here's the thing. These weren't hardened soldiers. These were low-level operatives. Errand runners. The kind of men a syndicate uses for overnight watch duty because they're cheap and they don't ask questions. And when Stallone crouched down in front of the one still conscious and asked where his son was, the man talked. Fast. He gave them a second location. A converted office building about 12 miles south. He said that's where they were keeping the package. He didn't even know Sage's name. Stallone and Dominic left both men zip-tied to a support column and drove south. The second building looked more legitimate. Clean exterior. Gated parking lot. But the gate was open and the lot was empty. That should have been the first warning. They went inside. The building was gutted. No furniture. No equipment. Just bare walls and fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Room after room. Nothing. Sage wasn't there. Nobody was. It was a decoy. A dead drop. The address existed specifically for situations like this. If a perimeter man got caught and talked, this is where he'd send people. A waste of time built into the system. But the building wasn't completely empty. In a back office on the second floor, Dominic found a filing cabinet. Inside were shipping manifests, dozens of them, dates, port numbers, cargo descriptions, destination codes, all tied to a logistics company called Arlo Freight Solutions, and cross-referenced with Pinnacle Ridge Media. This is where it turns. Because up until this moment, Stallone thought he was dealing with a kidnapping, a crime, A group of men who took his son to keep him quiet about some dirty money. That was bad enough. But those manifests told a different story. The operation behind Pinnacle Ridge wasn't a side hustle. It was an empire. Drugs moving through shipping containers disguised as film equipment. Weapons packed in crates labeled as lighting rigs. Routes spanning 3 states and at least 2 international ports. The money Sage had seen on that laptop was just one layer. The real operation was massive. Stallone stood in that empty office, holding a stack of manifests, and for the first time, he understood the scale of what he was up against. This wasn't a producer and a few thugs. This was organized, layered, protected. Dominic copied everything onto a portable drive. They took the originals, and they left. The drive back was quiet. Neither of them spoke for a long time. When they got back to Stallone's house, the sun was up. Stallone sat at the kitchen table. He poured himself a glass of water and drank it slowly. Dominic spread the manifests out across the counter and started photographing each page. And for a moment it felt like they had the upper hand. They'd hit 2 locations. They had physical evidence of a major criminal operation. They had names, dates, shipping routes. Enough to hand to any federal agency and trigger a full investigation. Enough, maybe, to force a negotiation for Sage's release. Stallone leaned back in his chair. He looked at Dominic. "We've got them," he said. "This is leverage. Real leverage." Dominic nodded. "We hand this to the right people, they'll have to deal." For the first time in 18 hours, Stallone exhaled. His shoulders dropped. He picked up the notepad from the night before and flipped through it again. The pen marks, the timestamps, the details from the call. All of it was starting to form a picture he could use. He allowed himself to believe, just for a moment, that the worst part might already be over. That he'd kicked in the right doors, found the right evidence, and now it was just a matter of making the right call. A few hours, maybe less, and Sage would be home. The kitchen was still. Morning light came in through the window. Dominic poured coffee. Stallone closed his eyes and pressed his palms flat against the table. The cracked table. The one that started all of this. He thought it was almost over. It wasn't. Stallone's phone buzzed on the table. One notification. A photo. He opened it. Sage was sitting in a chair. Bruised but upright. Alive. He was holding a newspaper with today's date clearly visible. Below the photo, a caption. 6 words. "We know about Dominic. Pull back." Stallone stared at the screen. Then he turned it toward Dominic. Neither of them said a word for a full 10 seconds. Now think about what that message means. It doesn't just mean they know Stallone hit the warehouse. It means they were watching. In real time. They knew about Dominic by name. They knew the 2 of them had been working together. They knew about the raid. They probably knew about the manifests. And they sent this message not as a threat but as a demonstration. They were saying, "We see everything you do." The nature of the whole thing changed in that moment. This was no longer a father chasing down the men who took his son. This was a man being tracked by an organization with eyes everywhere. The walls of his own house no longer felt safe. Dominic moved first. He pulled the battery from Stallone's phone, then his own. He went to the car and removed a small GPS tracker that had been fixed to the underside of the rear bumper. It hadn't been there the day before. Someone had placed it during the night while the car sat in the driveway. They were inside the perimeter, close enough to touch. Stallone packed a bag in under 3 minutes. Dominic did the same. They left the house on foot through the back gate, walked 6 blocks to a gas station, and paid cash for a prepaid phone. Then they called a cab to a motel in Glendale. No names, no cards, no trail. Sitting on the edge of a motel bed with the manifests spread across the comforter, Stallone asked the question that changed everything. Who's running this? Not who grabbed Sage. Not who made the call. Who sits at the top? Because the warehouse guards didn't plan this. Martin Greer didn't plan this. Someone above them gave the order. Someone with enough reach to have eyes on Stallone's house, contacts inside the LAPD, and infrastructure across 3 states. Dominic went through the manifests line by line. Every shipping route fed through a real estate holding company called Vanderlyn Group. And every entity in the Vanderlyn Group traced back to a single name. Victor Aslan. Believe me, this is not a man you go looking for. Aslan was a real estate developer on paper. Office towers, waterfront condos, mixed-use developments up and down the West Coast. He showed up at charity galas. He donated to city council campaigns. He had lawyers, accountants, and a public profile so clean it practically shined. But behind that front, Aslan ran one of the most diversified criminal operations in the western United States. Drugs, weapons, money laundering through construction projects, film production companies, import-export logistics, every piece connected, every piece deniable, and Sage had stumbled into the middle of it by reading the wrong spreadsheet. Stallone didn't sit with this information for long. He made a decision within the hour. If the organization knew every move he made from the outside, he'd get inside instead. He called Aslan's office from the prepaid phone, used his real name, said he'd heard about some investment opportunities in Aslan's latest development and wanted to meet. Now, here's where being Sylvester Stallone actually mattered. Not the fighter, not the father, the celebrity. Because when a man like that calls your office and says he wants to talk business, you take the meeting. No questions. Aslan's assistant booked it for the following afternoon. Stallone walked into that office wearing a blazer, a watch worth more than the motel room, and a wire taped flat against his ribs. Dominic had fitted it that morning. Military grade. Undetectable by standard security sweeps. The office was on the 32nd floor of a tower in Century City. Glass walls. Clean lines. Aslan met him with a handshake and a smile. Mid-60s. Silver hair. Tailored suit. The kind of man who makes you feel welcome right before he takes everything you have. They talked for 20 minutes. Real estate. Returns. Tax structures. Stallone played the part perfectly. Interested but cautious. Asking the right questions. Letting Aslan talk. And while Aslan talked, Stallone's eyes moved. He scanned the room, the desk, the shelves, and then he saw it. Behind Aslan's chair, mounted on the wall, was a bank of 4 security monitors. Small screens, easy to miss. 3 showed hallways and parking structures. The 4th showed a room. A windowless room with a single door and a figure sitting in a chair. Sage. Stallone didn't react. He kept his face still. He kept talking about zoning permits and projected yields. But inside, something locked into place. He could see the feed label in the corner of the monitor. A location code. And he memorized it. He shook Aslan's hand again on the way out. Smiled. Said he'd have his business manager follow up. And the moment he was in the elevator, he pulled out the prepaid phone and sent the location code to Dominic. If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button. Because what comes next is the part nobody expected. Dominic ran the code through a contact at a private mapping firm. It matched a converted estate 40 minutes outside the city, in the hills east of Pasadena. A property owned through 3 layers of shell companies by the Vanderlyn Group. But that wasn't the only thing Dominic found. While tracing the code, he pulled Port Authority records tied to Arlo Freight Solutions. A major shipment was scheduled to leave the Long Beach port in less than 18 hours. 3 containers. If those containers cleared customs and hit open water, every piece of physical evidence connecting Aslan to the operation would disappear. Gone. Clean. They had 1 night, 1 window, and 2 targets. Stallone looked at Dominic across the motel room. We split up, he said. Dominic shook his head. That's a bad idea. It's the only idea. They left the motel at 11 that night. Dominic took a rental car south toward Long Beach. Stallone took the prepaid cab east toward the hills. The plan was simple because it had to be. Dominic would intercept the shipment at the port, secure the physical evidence, and get it into the hands of a federal contact he trusted. A woman named Torres, FBI, out of the San Diego field office. Dominic had worked with her on a cross-border case years back. She was clean. More importantly, she was outside the LA jurisdiction where Aslan had people bought and paid for. Stallone's job was Sage. Get in. Get his son. Get out. The estate sat at the end of a private road, surrounded by oak trees and a low stone wall. Not a fortress. Not a compound. It looked like a rich man's weekend house. That was the point. Nobody driving past would think twice. Stallone left the cab a half-mile down the road and walked the rest. The air was cool. No wind. He could hear his own breathing and nothing else. The vest was on under his jacket. No gun. He'd refused one again. Dominic had argued with him about it for 10 minutes. Stallone said, "If I go in there with a weapon, somebody dies. Maybe Sage. I'm not taking that chance." He came over the stone wall on the east side where the tree cover was thickest. The house was dark except for 2 windows on the ground floor. Through one, he could see movement. A man walking back and forth. Through the other, just light. No movement. There were 3 guards. The first was standing by the front entrance, smoking. Stallone circled wide and came up behind the house instead. The second guard was sitting on a patio chair near the back door, scrolling through his phone. Stallone moved up behind him, quiet as a man that size can be, and locked his arm around the guard's neck. Not a choke. A hold. Tight enough to cut the blood flow. The guard struggled for about 5 seconds and then went limp. Stallone lowered him to the ground and zip-tied his wrists behind his back with a strip from Dominic's kit. The back door was unlocked. He stepped inside. A hallway. Tile floors. He could hear a television playing somewhere on the other end of the house. He moved toward the stairs. According to the security feed, Sage was in a lower-level room. That meant basement. The stairwell was narrow. Concrete steps. At the bottom, a single corridor with 2 doors. One was open. Empty. The other was closed. A padlock hung from the latch. Stallone broke it with a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. One hit. The lock snapped clean off. He opened the door. And there was Sage, sitting on a bare mattress on the floor. Wrists raw from zip ties that had been cut off at some point. Eyes swollen. Lips split. Dehydrated. But alive. Awake. Looking right at his father. Sage didn't speak at first. His mouth opened but nothing came. Stallone crossed the room in 2 steps and dropped to his knees. He grabbed his son's face with both hands. "I'm here," he said. "It's done. We're leaving." Sage's hands came up and gripped his father's arms. Tight. Shaking. He nodded. That was all. That was enough. Stallone helped him to his feet. Sage was weak but he could walk. They moved toward the stairs. Stallone went first. They made it halfway down the corridor when the front door of the house opened above them and a voice echoed through the hallway. "Mr. Stallone." Stallone stopped. He put one hand on Sage's chest and pressed him against the wall behind him. Then he looked up the stairs. Victor Aslan stood at the top. 2 men behind him. One of them was armed. Aslan was not. He was wearing a coat like he'd just arrived. His expression was flat. Not angry. Not afraid. Controlled. "You broke into my property," Aslan said. "That's a crime. I could call the police right now." Stallone climbed the stairs. Slowly. 1 step at a time. His eyes never left Aslan's face. When he reached the top, the 2 men shifted forward. Stallone didn't look at them. He looked at Aslan. "Call them," he said. "Call every cop you own. Then explain the boy in your basement." Aslan smiled. "Just barely. There's no boy in my basement. There's a trespasser in my home. That's what the cameras will show." Stallone hit him. 1 straight right hand to the center of Aslan's face. The man dropped like his legs were made of paper. The 2 men behind him lunged. Stallone caught the first one with an elbow that cracked across the man's temple. The second one swung wide. Stallone stepped inside the swing, grabbed the man by the collar, and threw him into the wall. Hard. The man didn't get up. Aslan was on the floor, bleeding from the nose, trying to speak. Stallone crouched down over him. "Close." And this is where it mattered that he was wearing the wire. "Say his name," Stallone said. "Say my son's name. Tell me why he's here." Aslan, dazed, bleeding, still trying to play the game, said the worst possible thing he could have said. "Your son saw what he shouldn't have. That's why he's here. And if you think this ends with you walking out, I have people you've never even heard of." Every word recorded. every syllable transmitted to a receiver in Dominic's bag, which, at that exact moment, was sitting in the office of Special Agent Torres at the Long Beach field station. Alongside 3 shipping containers worth of evidence Dominic had secured 20 minutes earlier. Stallone stood up. He looked down at Aslan. "It already ended," he said. "You just don't know it yet." He went back down the stairs, lifted Sage's arm over his shoulder, and walked out the front door. The FBI moved faster than anyone expected. Within 12 hours of Torres receiving the wire recording and the shipping evidence, a federal judge signed warrants for Victor Aslan, Martin Greer, and 14 other individuals tied to the Vanderlyn Group. The raids hit simultaneously across 3 states: homes, offices, storage facilities, port operations, all of it taken apart in a single coordinated strike before anyone in the organization had time to make a phone call. Aslan was arrested at a hospital where he was being treated for a broken nose. He didn't resist. His lawyers showed up within the hour, but it didn't matter. The wire recording was clean. His own voice in his own home, admitting to the kidnapping of a 22-year-old man. Admitting that the reason was financial exposure. Admitting, in that arrogant, half-conscious moment on his hallway floor, that the organization stretched further than anyone outside it had ever known. The shipping containers Dominic secured at the port held enough physical evidence to build cases that would take prosecutors years to finish. Drug weight alone crossed federal trafficking thresholds 10 times over. Weapons, counterfeit documents, financial records linking shell companies to legitimate businesses across the western seaboard. It was the kind of haul that makes careers at the Department of Justice. And it all started because a 22-year-old kid read the wrong spreadsheet on a folding table. Greer was picked up at his home in the Hollywood Hills. He didn't say a word, didn't ask for a lawyer right away, just sat in the back of the car and stared out the window. The man who had smiled at Stallone across a restaurant table and said, "Let's not do anything hasty," had nothing left to say. 3 police officers within the LAPD were suspended pending internal investigation. Aslan's claim that he had people inside the department turned out to be true. 2 were mid-rank. 1 was a lieutenant with 20 years on the force. All 3 had been receiving payments routed through Arlo Freight Solutions for the better part of a decade. The department launched a full review. It made the news for weeks. Now here's the part that didn't make the news. 2 days after the raids, Stallone brought Sage home. Not to the main house, to a smaller property upstate, away from cameras, away from press, away from everything. Sage had been checked out by doctors. Physically, he would recover. The bruises would heal. The dehydration was already reversing. But he was quiet. He stayed quiet for days. Stallone didn't push him. He didn't ask what happened in that basement. He didn't tell him it was going to be fine. He just stayed close, cooked meals, sat on the porch while Sage slept, checked on him in the middle of the night without opening the door all the way. Just a crack, just enough to hear him breathing. On the 4th night, Sage came downstairs on his own. Stallone was sitting at a small wooden table in the kitchen, reading. Sage sat down across from him. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Sage said, "I keep thinking I should have taken a photo of that spreadsheet." Stallone looked at him. "You told me instead. That was enough. Was it? You're sitting here. So yeah, it was." Sage nodded slowly. Then he said something that cracked Stallone open in a way no punch ever could. He said, "I knew you'd come. The whole time. I didn't know how. But I knew you would." Stallone didn't respond right away. He pressed his hands flat on the table. Took a breath. Then he reached across and put his hand on the back of his son's neck and pulled him forward until their foreheads touched. They stayed like that for a long time. No words. No noise. Just a father and a son sitting in a quiet kitchen after the worst week of their lives. Dominic visited once about a week later. He and Stallone sat outside while Sage rested. Dominic told him Torres had called the case one of the largest organized crime takedowns on the West Coast in a decade. Stallone listened. He nodded. Then he said, "I don't care about that." And he meant it. He didn't care about the scope. He didn't care about the headlines. He didn't care that Victor Aslan's empire was being dismantled brick by brick in federal court. The only thing that had ever mattered was the boy upstairs. Months later, after the trials had begun and the media had mostly moved on, a reporter managed to reach Stallone by phone. She asked him how he felt about what he'd done. She asked if he considered himself a hero. She asked if he was proud. Stallone was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm a father. That's all I've ever been. Everything else is just noise." He hung up. Back at the original house, the kitchen table still had the crack in it. The one from that first night, when a fist came down so hard the wood split. Stallone never repaired it. He never replaced the table. It sat there in the same spot, under the same light, with that fracture running through the center like a scar. Some people asked him why he kept it. He never gave a straight answer. But if you looked at that crack and you knew what it meant, you didn't need one. That table held everything. The rage, the fear, the pen that wrote down every word, the silence after the call, and the morning after it was all over, when his son sat across from him and said, "I knew you'd come." That was enough.